Donald Trump, fascism for political expedience. I don't know what Donald Trump is in his heart. I don't necessarily care what's in his heart on this particular case. I care what's taking place in objective reality and what that particular person is doing, especially with the mantle of presidency and with all the powers that are endowed in that particular office. Whatever he is, what he is doing is political expedience. He needs to get elected. And when you don't have anything to run on to get elected, in his case, you demonize. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. And, I am not one to make references to Hitler. In fact, I took a lot of heat for hitting AOC for making this reference to concentration camps in this way she was making this allusion to World War II. I am not one of those people to do that. And I've often argued that I often care about what people are, meaning what's in them, because I think that affects outward reality. But more than what's in people sometimes that affects outward reality is the environment to which the people are in. I think that has more to do with shaping the individual than just individual factors. It's like this plant didn't just grow on its own. It needed a bunch of stuff in order to grow. Same thing with people. In this particular case, we're talking about politics, the goal of which is to get elected. And if you are one Donald Trump and you need to get elected and you don't have anything to run on other than, I would imagine, immigration, what do? You demonize, you castigate. You have an immigrant population to which there's a crisis at the border, as you call it. And you've demonized that particular group. Oh, we got to get them out. They're gang members, NS-13 or whatever the hell they call themselves. And that's been your mainstay. That's been your rally cry. Stock market is shaky at this point. I don't know if you've ever watched financial channels, but these guys are begging for a financial right. He's out there browbeating on the Fed chair to cut rates. An economy that is doing amazingly well doesn't browbeat the Fed chair to cut rates. You can't have it both ways. You can't say it's an awesome economy, but you're begging the Fed chair because he knows what they know. You've juiced up the economy, but for the most part, those people put that money in their pockets. They put it in their banks, or they just juiced it back into the stock market. All of that stuff is on shaky ground, and they are looking for a recession. You can't claim the economy. And not just that, when you're looking at the money in people's pockets, real wages went down. Real wages went down. My point is this. You set fires all around the world. You can say North Korea was an accomplishment, but if we're being honest, you set North Korea on fire in your path when you got into office. So, what do you have to run on? You can run on hatred. You can run on vitriol. And I don't think I'm being hyperreactive here, and maybe if I am being hyperreactive, fair enough. For the last several months, I've been reading Beaver's books, the Spanish Civil War, World War I, II, etc. But I guess my point is this. People aren't necessarily insane for saying that there are parallels in the behavior and the way that things are going. And oftentimes, I'm often unclear how that stuff takes place. I often think history is a living thing. The stuff that took place is back then, for the most part, the forces haven't necessarily, we're not undetached from those forces per se. They may look a little different to us, and oftentimes because we weren't back then, and we weren't paying attention to things that back then, stuff that's taking place back then looks entirely new, it takes on a different flavor per se. But in this case, what's more interesting to me is more so the environmental dynamics that pushes a particular president to take a particular behavior. Not necessarily because that president is in its heart, not even necessarily because the president necessarily would do that on a random day, but because he needs to do that because he doesn't want to look like a fool when he loses the next election. He's turning this into theater and cartoon because this is his best card. What am I talking about? Donald Trump put out a tweet telling Ilham Omar, AOC, and all these other people to go back to Africa. Now, I made the point that this tweet is just a tweet. But I understand that there are people who look at the president with a certain degree of esteem that may feel some kind of way about the president essentially saying, get out of the country, go back to Africa. The response to this from the media, from the Democratic Party, was severe. Donald Trump plays on that response and uses that as a campaign launch. and runs on it. Runs on it. And not just runs on it, doubles down. And before I get to that point, Donald Trump today came out with this, a new birther type theory.
Well, there's a lot of talk about the fact that she was married to her brother. I know nothing about it. I hear she was married to her brother. You're asking me a question about it. I don't know, but I'm sure that somebody would be looking at that.
The President of the United States has just said, Ilhan Omar, that he heard she was married to her brother. That's massively undignified for the office of presidency. Now, this came after, and I showed this video, and oddly enough, there were some people on this channel that didn't understand why this was threatening, and that's astonishing to me, but nevertheless, there's a racial divide on this stuff, so fair enough. But I got to say, though, this notion of interdisciplinary or whatever, or intersectionality, that's why it falls apart. This, to anybody, or to, let's say, many people who are African American, especially people who are immigrants, looks threatening. There's a large mob of angry white people that are probably gun toters, where the President of the United States is whipping them up into a furor, telling these people, oh, she's spitting on our troops, And their perspective of her, because many of them don't even know her, is being governed by this particular moment. And he's going to go all around the country, and he's going to do exactly what he's doing here, whipping people up into a furor. These people were screaming, send her back. It's not un-American to criticize America. In fact, it's the most American thing on the planet. Not to mention, it's her job. She's a congresswoman. Everybody in Congress bitches about the government. Just saying. Let's watch it.
He pleaded for compassion for ISIS recruits attempting to join the terrorist organization. She was looking for compassion. Omar laughed that Americans speak of al-Qaeda in a menacing tone and remarked that you don't say America with this intensity. You say al-Qaeda makes you proud. Al-Qaeda makes you proud. You don't speak that way about America. And at a press conference just this week, when asked whether she supported al-Qaeda, that's our enemy. That's our enemy.
You know, the irony of this is Donald Trump was protecting al-Qaeda terrorists in Idlib and was willing to go to war over that. You don't believe me? The United Nations said there were, by their own estimates, between 10 to 40,000 terrorists in Idlib province. Donald Trump was threatening in that area because the United States was working with those guys to undermine the Syrian government. They didn't necessarily want to own up to that point, but the fact that they were trying to protect Idlib, and they were all of a sudden, even though it was perfectly understood that Idlib province were harboring al-Qaeda terrorists, Trump was trying to protect them. And we were working with them. Sad, but that is true.
They are a very serious problem that we take care of, but they always seem to come along somewhere. She refused to answer. She didn't want to give an answer to that question. Omar blamed the United States for the crisis in Venezuela. I mean, think of that one. And she looks down with contempt on the hard-working Americans, saying that ignorance is pervasive in many parts of this country. And obviously and importantly, Omar has a history of launching vicious anti-Semitic screeds. And she talked about the evil Israel, and it's all about the Benjamins. Not a good thing to say.
When the Democratic Party chose to eat their own side alive by literally playing off of some Republican that he himself had put out stuff that was anti-Semitic, meaning attacking her for this. Thank you. I said early on before, I said the moment that they did that, I said you've attacked your side for something that in no way was anti-Semitic. And what took place? The very next time the Republicans started using the fact that Democrats was attacking Ilham Omar on this particular issue as an attack point in and of itself. And here we have it. Donald Trump using this very particular point. And I'll guarantee you what his campaign would say is, look, the Democratic Party themselves said that she was anti-Semitic. Thanks a lot. You saw the clip for yourself. He's literally whipping this crowd up into a fury. This crowd starts screaming, send her back, send her back, send her back. And he just stands there accepting the adulation of them being angry and vicious. There are some people who watch this channel that are Trump supporters. I don't think all Trump supporters are racist. I've never been in a camp, and I've said that on more than one occasion. What I would ask for you, though, is to look at this from the perspective of somebody that is not you. And somebody who may be an immigrant to this country, or for that matter, Ilhan herself. What do you think of that? I mean, they're screeching, send her back, send her back. These people are angry and they're pissed off. And he is associating her with terrorists. He's already said that she was... This is charged behavior. I guess that's my point. Be very clear. This is extraordinarily charged behavior, and he's running around the country with this. On the second point, beyond look at this from the perspective of somebody who's not you, this looks extremely threatening. On the second point, if the President of the United States, if this is all that the President of the United States has to run on, why would you want to elect that person back to office? I know this is going to be a perspective thing, meaning it's going to be Trump versus somebody else. But if he's running on a campaign like this, I find this to be extremely problematic. I find it to be problematic in the sense of it being charged racial and religious hatred behavior, if that makes sense. Like, it only takes a small percentage of people to get something in their head of this person is foreign. And whether that's attacking somebody in Ilhan's steed because they couldn't get their hands on her, or making an attack at her. This is problematic for the President of the United States to be setting into people's mind that she is somehow foreign, anti-American, and that she's been spitting on American interests. Donald Trump was asked about this in a press conference. Mr. President, when they were screaming, send this woman back, when you whipped this crowd up into this kind of hatred and furor over this woman, and they were screaming, send her back, why didn't you say anything about this? Why did you just stand there? Listen to what he says.
Rather fast, as you probably...
And by the way, this is Double Talk 101. You know, back in the 60s, go back to Africa, it used to be the textbook thing of racism. And some reason today, not so much. It's changed, apparently. Here's another point. Double talk. This not caring about reality. The problem with... They asked the Jews, and I know I hate Hitler references myself, but the reference makes sense. Why didn't you leave? Like when things got really, really bad, and I don't think America is Germany, but when things got really bad, why didn't you leave? And the reason was because it's kind of like it is now, where there's never anything just in one direction. There's always things that are kind of all over the place. You have some things that tell you things are not as bad. You have other things that say things are absolutely horrible. And so it kind of just inches its way into kind of horrible stuff. But you would have this back and forth where you couldn't necessarily tell what was reality. Well, listen to this. I love this. President of the United States. Why did you just stand there in that video that the entire world can watch and the entire world can see and didn't say anything about that crowd being whipped up into that fur?
Stop saying that. Well, number one, I think I did. I started speaking very quickly. It really was a loud... I disagree with it, by the way, but it was quite a chant. And I felt a little bit badly about it, but I will say this, I did, and I started speaking very quickly, but it started up rather fast, as you probably noticed.
So you'll tell your supporters never to
Well, I would say that. I was not happy with it. I disagree with it. But again, I didn't say that, they did, but I disagree with it.
But they were echoing what you said in your first tweet, that they should go back.
Well, I don't think if you examine it, I don't think you'll find that, but I disagree with it. Anybody else?
Why did you?
I started speaking really quickly. I mean, like, immediately, I started speaking real quickly. I mean, they just kind of whipped up, and
But they always seem to come along somewhere. She refused to answer. She didn't want to give an hard-working American.
Did he start
saying
speaking
that
really quickly?
Ignorance is obviously and importantly.
Let's see.
Omar has a history of launching vicious anti-Semitic screeds.
That doesn't look like he's speaking quickly. It looks like he's accepting the adoration of the audience in this hateful rage of sending her back. In fact,
And she talked about
Trump waits a good 10 seconds before saying anything else, basking in the adulation of this hatred and anger, send her back. Is it possible to be a Trump supporter without necessarily liking the fact that he's making a campaign around a 20-something-year-old woman that just will be a member of Congress, and that he's whipping this up into a hatred and furor? That even if you may be saying that there may be some people out there that is not, and we clearly know that there are some people out there that is not. And the secondary question of whether or not the President of the United States should use his bully pulpit to focus on one individual. And if that's all he has to run on, is that not somewhat of an indictment in and of itself? This is disgusting. I'm sorry, this is utterly disgusting. So I'll end this here. Look, man, you can say I don't like the Democratic Party. You can even say I like Trump on immigration. But can we at the very least admit that if you are not white, this looks somewhat threatening? The President of the United States to go back to Africa. Now, the tweet itself, I don't necessarily care. And the reaction of media and the Democratic Party might have been overblown. But he's using that reaction as a campaign stump. And this seems to be a centerpiece of his campaign, at least up until the point where he gets an opponent. I would say this, and I'll end it on this. This video is not too long. Deny him quarter on this. And what I mean by that is, there's always this argument of how much do you push down this type of rhetoric as opposed to espousing your own point of view. And I got to be honest, I don't necessarily know the correct amount to dance between those two things. I would say that denying him quarter is a focusing on things that actually matter. It does matter that he's doing this, but it also matters that he's failed magnificently. And the reason that he's doing this is that he has failed to that degree. Denying him quarter on this to some degree is dragging the conversation back to the things to which he has failed miserably as a president for. It is hitting him on the economy. It's hitting him on the fact that half of the country barely can make ends meet. It's hitting him on the fact that healthcare costs continues to rise, drug costs continues to rise, that he was trying to cut healthcare, even though he was telling people he was going to give them big, beautiful healthcare, that he hasn't raised the minimum wage, that the tax cut went to the majority of the wealthy, that the environment is falling apart and his policies are only making it worse, that he's been a president for the rich, that he's failed magnificently at his job. Like, that's the thing that you hit him on. This other stuff is important. But you've lost that race in 2016 when that race was made around identity. He's trying to run on the exact same thing. And he's trying to drag you into another debate on that topic. I don't know the balance that you take between defense of the identity thing, because this channel has always made the argument that it's not ensconced in identity. I think class matters more. With one caveat. My one caveat was always, until the identity is attacked. You can't have a situation where America falls back to where it was, where this type of stuff is okay. And not just going back to where it was. I don't think it's a go back to where it was thing. I think it's, look, there's never a, everybody always wants to go back to something else. There's no going back to anything else. There was never a thing unto itself. History and the world was always moving to something else. Same thing now. This looks different. This looks different. Having a president in modern times behave in this way looks different. This looks nasty. This looks nasty. You can support Trump. At the very least, let's admit that looks nasty. Thanks all.